Despite his profound connection with God, he experienced what mystics call the dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual dryness when divine consolation seems withdrawn. According to accounts from fellow friars, Padre Pio retreated to the monastery chapel well after midnight, visibly distressed by what he later described as doors closing in the spiritual realm. Though accustomed to spiritual warfare, this particular battle left him momentarily unable to access the remarkable gifts through which he had helped countless pilgrims. Kneeling before the crucifix in the darkened church, his stigmata causing him tremendous physical pain, he found himself unable to form the elaborate prayers that usually flowed so easily from his heart. In this moment of profound spiritual constriction, Padre Pio was inspired to simplify his approach completely. Instead of struggling to articulate complex devotions, he focused all his spiritual energy on one simple phrase, repeated 3 times with increasing intensity. Jesus, in you I trust, open the doors that the world has closed. With each repetition, witnesses recalled seeing his countenance gradually transform, the tension in his face releasing, his breathing becoming more peaceful, his hunched shoulders straightening as though a burden was being lifted. The third utterance of this powerful invocation seemingly broke through whatever spiritual barrier had been erected, and those present reported that the chapel's candles momentarily flickered as though touched by an invisible breeze, despite the still night air. What happened next became one of the less publicized but profoundly moving episodes in Padre Pio's ministry. By dawn, a remarkable series of coincidences began unfolding. 3 separate situations that had seemed hopelessly deadlocked for months suddenly found resolution. A generous donor unexpectedly provided funds for the hospital project that had stalled. A priest who had fallen away from his vocation and resisted all previous outreach requested a reconciliation meeting, and a young woman with a mysterious illness that had confounded doctors began showing signs of improvement. If you believe this teaching from Padre Pio could transform your life as it has for countless others, write in the comments, "I am ready for this blessing." Subscribe to this channel and share this message with someone who is facing closed doors in their life right now. The spiritual heritage of Padre Pio is meant to be shared, and your act of faith might be the catalyst for someone else's miracle. The invocation that Padre Pio revealed in that moment of spiritual breakthrough contains 3 essential elements that make it particularly powerful for opening closed doors in your life. Jesus, in you I trust, open the doors that the world has closed. The first element establishes the proper spiritual foundation. Beginning with the name of Jesus immediately aligns your petition with divine authority. Padre Pio often taught that the name of Jesus itself carries supernatural power when pronounced with reverence and faith. The second element, in you I trust, represents the crucial attitude of surrender and confidence that activates spiritual principles. Without this trust, prayers become mere words. With it, they become channels for divine action. Finally, the I specific request, open the doors that the world has closed, acknowledges both the reality of your obstacles and the higher power that can override them. To apply this teaching effectively, Padre Pio provided specific guidance that his spiritual children carefully documented. Find a quiet moment, preferably in the evening when the day's activities have settled and your mind can focus more completely on spiritual realities. Light a blessed candle if you have one, though this isn't essential. Place a sacred image before you if possible, and center yourself through a few moments of silence. Then, with all the sincerity your heart can muster, repeat the invocation 3 times, allowing a brief pause between each repetition. The first utterance acknowledges the closed door, the second builds spiritual momentum, and the third completes the spiritual circuit, so to speak. After the third repetition, remain in receptive silence for at least 3 minutes, allowing space for divine inspiration regarding any actions you might need to take. This is not a magical formula, but a spiritual practice grounded in the mystical wisdom that Padre Pio gained through decades of profound communion with God. The effectiveness of this invocation depends not on its precise wording. Indeed, Padre Pio sometimes recommended slight variations to address specific situations, but on the authentic faith with which it's expressed. If you approach this practice as a mechanical ritual or a last-ditch effort when all else has failed, its effectiveness may be limited. Have you ever stood before a door that seemed impossibly locked, feeling the weight of rejection and limitation crushing your spirit? Those moments when opportunities slip through your fingers, relationships fall apart, or your deepest prayers seem to echo unanswered in an empty room. They leave you wondering if you're destined to remain forever on the wrong side of life's closed doors. Today I'm going to share with you an extraordinary teaching from Padre Pio, a saint whose wisdom has transformed countless lives throughout generations. This isn't just another prayer or spiritual practice. It's a divine key that has unlocked impossible situations for thousands of devoted followers who discovered this powerful secret. Before I reveal this life-changing teaching that Padre Pio entrusted to his closest spiritual children, you must understand something crucial about the nature of closed doors in your life. Every obstacle you face, every rejection letter you receive, every relationship that seems irreparably damaged, these aren't just random, unfortunate events. Padre Pio understood that these closed doors often serve as divine redirections, protecting you from paths not meant for your journey, or preparing you for greater blessings that require your patience and spiritual growth. Yet he also knew that many doors remain closed not because God wills them shut, but because we lack the spiritual tools to open them properly. What would change in your life tonight if you discovered that 3 simple phrases, spoken with unwavering faith, could begin to shift the seemingly immovable obstacles in your path? Padre Pio, with his miraculous gifts of bilocation, reading souls, and bearing the wounds of Christ, didn't just theorize about spiritual principles. He demonstrated their power through countless documented miracles. His hands, marked with the stigmata for over 50 years, became instruments of divine intervention. And now, through this teaching I'm about to share, his spiritual wisdom can work in your life too. The divine assistance that flowed through his remarkable ministry continues today. For those who embrace this often overlooked, but profoundly powerful practice he recommended to those facing their most challenging circumstances. The spiritual tradition that Padre Pio cherished recognized the extraordinary power of short, heartfelt prayers, what the Church calls ejaculatory prayers or arrow prayers. These brief but intense invocations shoot straight to heaven, bypassing the complications of our overthinking minds and connecting directly with divine grace. Unlike lengthy devotions that require quiet settings and extended time, these powerful phrases can be uttered in any moment of need, while facing a difficult conversation, before opening an important email, or when confronting situations that seem beyond your control. Padre Pio understood that in our most challenging moments, when anxiety clouds our ability to form elaborate prayers, these simple expressions of faith become our most potent spiritual weapons. The effectiveness of these short invocations lies not in their eloquence but in their repetition with genuine faith. Throughout biblical and spiritual history, we see the mysterious power of the number 3, from Christ's resurrection on the 3rd day to Peter's threefold profession of love after his threefold denial. Padre Pio recognized this pattern as more than coincidental. It represents a divine rhythm that resonates with spiritual reality. When you utter a prayer 3 times with authentic belief, you're not engaging in superstition, but aligning yourself with a spiritual principle that saints and mystics have recognized throughout the ages. This practice creates a spiritual momentum that seems to pierce through the barriers between our material world and the divine realm, where all things become possible. In his lengthy correspondences with spiritual children facing impossible situations, terminal illness diagnoses, financial ruin, family estrangements that seemed beyond reconciliation, Padre Pio frequently prescribed specific short prayers to be repeated with unwavering trust. His spiritual children would often report that after faithfully following his guidance, unexpected phone calls would come, medical test results would inexplicably improve, or long-closed hearts would suddenly soften. These weren't random coincidences but manifestations of a spiritual principle that Padre Pio understood profoundly. When faith-filled words are spoken with persistence and genuine belief, they create ripples in both the visible and invisible realms that surround us. The barriers we perceive as impenetrable begin to reveal unexpected openings when approached with this special form of prayer. On a particularly dark night in San Giovanni Rotondo, Padre Pio faced an unusual spiritual trial, but when offered with the childlike trust that Padre Pio himself exemplified, a trust that expects divine response while accepting God's perfect timing, even the most seemingly impenetrable doors begin to show signs of yielding. Remember his guidance. Repeat this prayer for 3 consecutive evenings, especially in cases of long-standing blockages that have resisted previous attempts at resolution. Among the many documented accounts of this prayer's effectiveness, the story of Maria, consiglia from Naples, stands out with particular clarity. After losing her job during an economic downturn, this widow with 3 children had submitted over 60 applications without receiving a single interview. Financial desperation mounted as her savings dwindled, and the emotional toll of constant rejection left her increasingly hopeless. Through a chance encounter with one of Padre Pio's spiritual daughters, she learned of this specific prayer practice. Though initially skeptical, her desperate circumstances compelled her to try it. On the morning after her 3rd evening of prayer, she received 2 unexpected phone calls, both offering interview opportunities. The position she ultimately accepted not only provided better compensation than her previous job, but also allowed the flexible scheduling she needed for her family responsibilities. It wasn't just that doors opened, she later testified, but that they opened to something better than I had imagined to ask for. Perhaps even more remarkable are the accounts of reconciliation that followed this prayer practice. The case of the Esposito family demonstrates how doors seemingly sealed by decades of bitter estrangement can unexpectedly yield. 2 brothers who hadn't spoken for 23 years due to a disputed inheritance found themselves accidentally seated next to each other at a community function. Rather than leaving as would have been their normal response, both experienced what they later independently described as an unexplainable willingness to acknowledge each other. Their initial awkward greeting evolved into a conversation, then a shared meal, and eventually a full reconciliation that restored not only their relationship, but healed divisions that had spread throughout the extended family. When later asked what had changed, the younger brother mentioned that his wife had been practicing this specific prayer taught by Padre Pio, having learned it during a pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo just weeks before the unexpected encounter. The pattern that emerges across countless testimonies reveals an important spiritual principle. When this prayer opens doors, it often does so through seemingly natural means rather than overtly supernatural interventions. Unexpected phone calls come, chance encounters occur, forgotten connections suddenly remember you, or previously resistant hearts soften without apparent explanation. Medical tests show improvement that doctors attribute to spontaneous remission. Financial resources appear through channels so ordinary you might miss their providential timing if not attentive. Padre Pio understood that divine action typically works through natural circumstances rather than against them, which is why he encouraged his spiritual children to remain alert for subtle signs of movement rather than expecting dramatic manifestations. The doors that matter most in your life, opportunities for work that aligns with your purpose, restoration of damaged relationships, improvements in physical well-being, or resolution of financial constraints, rarely swing open with theatrical flair but rather often begin with nearly imperceptible shifts that gradually widen into unmistakable openings. The spiritual mechanism behind this prayer's effectiveness relates to what Padre Pio often described as the economy of faith. In numerous letters to his spiritual children, he explained that faith operates as a genuine spiritual force, not merely a psychological state, but an actual conduit through which divine power flows into material reality. When you declare, "Jesus, in you I trust," while facing closed doors, you're not simply expressing a sentiment but activating a spiritual principle. This declaration, when genuine, creates what Padre Pio called a sacred space of possibility around the seemingly immovable obstacle. The repeating of this invocation 3 times isn't about manipulating God through repetition, but about reinforcing your own spiritual alignment and breaking through the crusted layers of doubt, disappointment, and resignation that have accumulated around the closed door. Padre Pio compared this process to the biblical account of Joshua at Jericho, where repeated action preceded the miraculous collapse of insurmountable walls. The walls didn't fall because of the trumpets or the walking, he explained to his spiritual daughter facing impossible circumstances, but because these actions embodied persistent faith that refused to acknowledge the permanence of the obstacle. Similarly, your repetition of this specific prayer represents your refusal to accept the closed doors in your life as final verdicts. Each utterance deepens your conviction and expands the sacred space of possibility surrounding your situation. Padre Pio's spiritual insight revealed that many divine interventions remain unrealized, not because God is unwilling, but because our faltering faith provides insufficient spiritual conductivity for the miracle to manifest in material reality. You must understand that this teaching isn't about obtaining whatever your immediate desires might focus on, but about aligning with divine providence regarding the doors that should open in your life. Sometimes, Padre Pio explained, the most loving answer to this prayer is the opening of an entirely different door than the one you've been desperately pushing against. His spiritual children often reported that after practicing this prayer, they received unexpected clarity about which doors they should actually be approaching, rather than continuing to exhaust themselves against entrances never meant for them. This discernment represents one of the prayer's most valuable gifts, not just the opening of doors, but divine guidance regarding which doors will lead to your authentic fulfillment. As you practice this evening, remain open to the possibility that the response might come as redirection rather than the specific resolution you've been envisioning. The proper spiritual disposition for this practice involves what Padre Pio called expectant surrender, a seemingly paradoxical combination of complete trust in divine wisdom and active anticipation of tangible results. This balanced approach prevents two common extremes that diminish prayer's effectiveness: passive resignation that doesn't truly expect change, or demanding impatience that attempts to dictate precise outcomes and timing. Before you begin repeating the invocation this evening, take a moment to consciously adopt this disposition. Acknowledge the closed doors in your specific situation without minimizing their impact on your life. Then deliberately release your grip on exactly how and when they must open. This internal positioning, neither denying reality nor being consumed by it, creates the optimal condition for the prayer's effectiveness. The transformative potential of this practice extends beyond the specific doors you're currently focused on, gradually reshaping your entire relationship with obstacles. Many who incorporated this teaching into their spiritual lives reported a surprising development. Over time, they encountered fewer closed doors altogether. Padre Pio explained this phenomenon through a spiritual principle he called preemptive faith. When your default orientation becomes one of trust rather than anxiety, many potential obstacles dissipate before fully materializing in your path. Your consistent practice of this prayer doesn't just address current blockages, but begins to recalibrate your spiritual atmosphere, making you less susceptible to the closing of doors in the first place. This represents the deeper transformation Padre Pio envisioned for his spiritual children, not just receiving occasional divine interventions, but experiencing a fundamental shift in how they move through the world. For this reason, Padre Pio recommended incorporating this practice preventively, not waiting until you're facing a crisis before implementing it. Those facing particularly stubborn obstacles might begin with the 3-day intensive approach, repeating the invocation on 3 consecutive evenings. However, for ongoing spiritual protection, he advised establishing a weekly rhythm, perhaps every Sunday evening, of reaffirming this declaration of trust regarding all potential closed doors in your life. Many testimonies suggest that this preventive approach creates a kind of spiritual momentum that carries you through challenges with unexpected grace. Rather than constantly reacting to obstacles after they've solidified, you develop what one of Padre Pio's closest disciples described as a spirituality of openness that tends to discover pathways where others perceive only walls. This proactive dimension of the teaching transforms it from merely a spiritual technique for crisis moments into a fundamental life orientation. A particularly powerful application of this prayer practice emerges when facing doors that have closed due to others' free will decisions. Situations where someone has chosen to end a relationship, denied you an opportunity, or rejected your sincere efforts at reconciliation. Padre Pio's insight into these painful circumstances acknowledged both spiritual and psychological realities. He taught that while divine power never overrides human free will, it can create circumstances that invite reconsideration. The invocation, "Open the doors that the world has closed," works differently in these situations. Rather than forcing a change of heart in the other person, it often creates unexpected encounters or revelations that allow both parties to see the situation from new perspectives. This nuanced understanding preserves both the sovereignty of God and the freedom of human choice, while still making space for genuine transformation. The effectiveness of this approach is illustrated through countless reconciliation stories among Padre Pio's spiritual children. In one documented case, a mother and daughter whose relationship had been severed for nearly a decade due to a painful misunderstanding, both independently reported experiencing dreams of reconciliation during the same 3-day period when the mother was practicing this specific prayer. Neither had any external contact that might have triggered these similar dreams. Their eventual reconciliation began with a chance meeting in a location neither typically frequented. While skeptics might dismiss such occurrences as mere coincidence, Padre Pio's spiritual wisdom recognized them as the subtle choreography of divine intervention, working through natural channels, influencing circumstances without controlling wills. This delicate balance characterizes how the prayer often works in relational situations, creating new possibilities without forcing predetermined outcomes. When applying this prayer to relational closed doors, Padre Pio advised his spiritual children to specifically release any demands regarding exactly how the door should reopen. This surrender creates space for resolution patterns you might never have imagined. Sometimes the opening begins not with the specific relationship, but with an internal healing that transforms how you perceive the situation. In other cases, third parties unexpectedly facilitate connections that neither original person would have initiated directly. The testimonies consistently reveal that the pathways to reconciliation rarely follow predictable scripts, but instead unfold through uniquely crafted sequences that address the specific wounds and barriers involved. As you apply this practice to relationships in your life that seem irreparably damaged, maintain openness to reconciliation, arriving through unexpected channels. The invocation doesn't guarantee that every relationship will be restored exactly as it was before, but it does invite divine wisdom to create the best possible resolution given all factors involved. The ultimate purpose of this teaching extends beyond merely solving your immediate problems. Padre Pio's deeper spiritual vision always encompassed not just the alleviation of suffering, but the transformation of the soul. As you practice this prayer regarding specific closed doors in your life, remain aware that something more profound is being offered, an invitation to develop what he called theological trust. This quality represents a fundamental shift from seeing God primarily as a problem solver to recognizing the divine presence as your most basic security, regardless of external circumstances. The consistent practice of declaring "Jesus in you I trust" gradually reforms your spiritual reflexes, so that trust becomes your default response rather than anxiety when facing life's inevitable closed doors. This internal transformation constitutes the prayer's most valuable long-term gift. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this teaching is how it gradually changes your perception of closed doors altogether. Many who integrated this practice into their spiritual lives reported a surprising development. Situations they would have previously interpreted as devastating blockages began to reveal themselves as providential redirections toward greater opportunities. This perceptual shift doesn't deny the genuine pain of disappointment, but places it within a larger context of divine guidance. Padre Pio often told his spiritual children that some of the most profound gratitudes they would eventually express would be for certain doors that remained firmly closed despite their fervent prayers for opening. This wisdom acknowledges the limited perspective from which we view our own lives, and the greater panorama visible from divine perspective. What appears as rejection often serves as protection or redirection toward more authentic paths. Don't wait for perfect circumstances or complete understanding before beginning this practice tonight. Padre Pio consistently emphasized that spiritual principles must be tested through application, rather than merely contemplated intellectually. Before you sleep this evening, take those few minutes to sincerely utter this invocation 3 times regarding whatever doors seem most firmly closed in your life right now. Approach this moment not with desperate grasping but with calm expectancy, like someone who has discovered a reliable key and confidently inserts it into a lock. The thousands who have experienced breakthrough after applying this teaching didn't possess perfect faith or complete comprehension of how it works. They simply took Padre Pio at his word and tested the principle in their own circumstances. Now it's your opportunity to discover what might shift in your situation when you sincerely declare, "Jesus, in you I trust. Open the doors that the world has closed." The moment of potential transformation isn't someday in a hypothetical future. When you've figured everything out, it's tonight, as you put this teaching into practice with whatever measure of faith you currently possess.